Hello and welcome to Unleashed. I'm your host, Will Bachman, and I'm delighted to welcome today Sarah Dobson, who is the founder and creative director at Design of Brand. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Will.
So, Sarah, the way I would articulate it is Design of Brand helps companies, particularly smaller founder led companies, on their brand identity. Elaborate on that. What did I miss?
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, we have developed a bit of a niche just working with founders who are starting a company or who are heading into an important chapter of their business where they want to invest in getting their brand set up as well as they possibly could be. So we've developed a process that includes brand strategy, sometimes naming, and composing a visual identity system that they can use to launch or relaunch with.
So, let's do a couple things. First, I'd like to ask you, for listeners who are not kind of brand experts, to explain to us what the full kind of deliverable of a brand identity would entail. And then maybe we could go through some case studies where you can walk us through some examples. We'll put a link in the show notes. But maybe first, what is a brand or what is a brand identity? What's the final deliverable include?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, broad strokes, the way I like to think about brand is what you understand about something, right? So it's not just a logo or a palette. It's really sort of the emotional read you have on a business or a person or a product or anything like that. So what we do is work to establish or shift what people are understanding about any given thing, right? So that comes with that comes positioning with it, which I'm sure a lot of your audience is more familiar with, having done research in the competitive landscape, really understanding what the business is trying to do and how they really want to feel to their audience. And then we look for ways to really translate that strategy to either the brand name, which is hopefully going to stick with the entity for a very long time, or to translate that to, a symbolic mark, a word mark. Obviously I'm a big typography nerd, so I put a lot of research and thought into how that resonates. And, we do light sort of product design and helping people pick packaging, if it's a packaging project, and all those good things, so that the whole impression of what you're presenting to the world really lines up with, the energy not only of the founders but of the product, what makes it different, and just really sort of compose that understanding that the audience has.
Hmm. So the brand identity would include the symbolic mark, which is a term I just learned from you, word mark, the potentially the name of even the company,
Yeah.
and then the
And
fonts, the colors, the guidelines on how to use the logo.
exactly. The whole visual identity system, it depends on the business too. Like photography might be really important. The interior design might be very important. We kind of try to touch all those really important things that, again, collectively are going to give that impression. And, not every brand has a symbolic mark, like FedEx is a word mark, right? And there's sort of that hidden little arrow in between the, what is it, the E and the X? I can't think of it off the top of my head, but, and then, symbolic marks, like Coca-Cola is another great example, right? You zoom in on any little part of that word mark and it's instantly recognizable. So the development of that, brand asset is the kind of thing where stylistically it may have shifted over time a little bit, but overall the equity is in how that reads and how it feels, the script font and the colors, obviously, and things like that. So it's not just like the, symbolic things. It's sort of the whole visual language, which is really what we help to establish.
Before we get into some specific case examples, I'm curious, what is your own practice when you're going through the world of collecting examples? Are you just sort of mentally making note of things, or do you have a practice of taking photos all the time and storing them in a, in a swipe file of some kind, or how, if so, how do you organize those things? What are you capturing? Like, how are you trying to constantly stay up with what the latest kind of design vibe is and so forth? Talk to me about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's a lot of real world, like you said, just taking photos of all sorts of things. Typography, like street signs is huge. Any little details of like a shape or a color palette, for example, I take tons of photos of things and just sort of bank them. And when something feels really sticky in my mind that I can't, you know, forget about it, I'm like, oh, I've got to find the right place in someone's identity to try this, whether it's a color palette or a shape or whatnot. But I've always just done that naturally. It was funny, I started using Pinterest really early on, and I think I was just one of the first people to be using it a lot. And so I have like 800,000 followers on Pinterest
What?
really randomly. And I don't
800,000
I
followers.
know it was closer to 1 million at one point, but it's funny because I don't use it like you would a typical social media platform, right? Where you're trying to engage and gain followers. It was just really me banking, ideas and all sorts of things. So I think that's just sort of how my brain has always worked to answer your question
Oh,
clearly. So yeah, it's not a lot of keeping up with design blogs and things like that. I think that's a little insular in a way. Like I think understanding what's trending is great because we always want to do it differently than that, right? You don't want to look like another X. So in any given category, even for, I'm doing a dental office right now, the norm of dentists, having researched that, even though intuitively I know, and I did a vet clinic recently, it's like intuitively, maybe not in New York, but most vets are like a cat and a dog and a heart and a cross, and
right, right.
dental offices like aren't really magnetic from a brand standpoint. It's just an expression of the dentist, right? So yeah, just understanding those landscapes intuitively and then doing research and then trying to stand out and be better than the norm is really always a important part of the process as well.
Okay, I can't let this Pinterest thing pass by because I mean, and this was not planned. I did not know that you had
Yeah.
800,000 followers on Pinterest, which is a lot.
Yeah.
So I got to ask about that. When you're taking these photos and posting them to Pinterest, are you
Mhm.
tagging them or commenting them to help you find it later, or just, take a picture, post? What?
I have boards that are organized by, and a lot of them are secret boards, to be
Oh,
honest, that
secret
people
boards.
can't see. I probably have more secret boards than I have
Oh,
public
wow.
boards, where it's, palettes, photography. I have boards for every client, right? Where I'm just
Oh,
populating them. And the algorithm's so amazing now. I'm not really uploading a lot of new stuff. It's
hmm.
it's often just, going down rabbit holes of any particular thing, like for interiors for clients, for example, if they have a physical space. There's so much good stuff on there for that. And then symbols, like I'll look up, vintage toothpaste packaging and gather up all sorts of examples for that. So yeah, very rabbit hole research, visual research.
With 800,000 followers, have you gotten clients from that? Inquiries or
I don't think so. It's funny,
really?
like someone told me I should sell it because really I only use it for personal use, right? So theoretically you could sell this account and someone could, sell things on it, but I've never really used it for that. I am thinking about, well, I'm working on launching a course helping people figure out how to name their companies because it's something I
Huh.
love to do, but not everyone wants to make that investment. So kind of sharing
Hmm.
and sort of scaling, my capabilities with that would be really meaningful to me to help more people land on good names. So maybe
Wow.
I'll use it to promote that. See
All
if
right. Well,
that works.
before we leave Pinterest behind, what is your Pinterest account? Can someone
Mm.
just look up Sarah Dobson, or what are your at what?
It's at my initials, SCD.
At SCD.
Yeah, that's it.
So you were early.
Very early, very
I mean,
early.
to get a
Yeah.
three-letter. Okay. All right. I had no idea. That's
Yeah.
amazing. All right. So walk us through a case example of working with a founder where perhaps they didn't even have a name for their
Mhm.
company, and just sort of walk us through the process of what the conversations were like and how it evolved, and give us sort of a step by step.
Okay, I'll give you a condensed story of one company that has recently opened in New York that I mentioned briefly before we started recording, that is called Othership, and it's a social sauna and cold plunge business. And basically, when they started, one of the founders came to me and said, I have recently stopped drinking. He was actually in AA, and he was looking for other alternatives to, go out and not go to a bar. And he had just started dating his now wife, who's another co-founder who's incredible. And they were going to Abanya in just outside Toronto. And he just had this vision of creating what he was describing it at the time as sort of like the Soho House of wellness, this club that you could go and do healthy things. Um, Long story short, I actually had two other friends that were doing all this research all over the world. They were really into sauna culture as well. Oh, I just made balloons pop up somehow with my hand gesture. Um, and so I kind of knew they were running down this parallel path of developing this business. And I was like, oh, maybe they're going to be competitors. I don't know if I, might want to work with both of them. But they ended up meeting, and I basically, as they were prototyping the first location, got to experience them, developing the programming and really observing how people were using the space. They basically built out a sauna and a cold plunge in their garage in the backyard of one of the founders' homes in Toronto. And so from day one, I was sort of able to see how they were evolving this idea and coming together. And they were called at the time Inward. And so this is a particular example. I'll try and make this one quick because it's more of a brand, or a rebrand rather than but it's sort of from new because they hadn't really launched the business that time, but they were calling it Inward, and they'd also developed all this breath work stuff. And so I was seeing, okay, you've got these breathwork audio things you can listen to, you've got this physical space, and really help them just synthesize, like as I do with every client, if you are successful in creating this business, what is the biggest impact that it can have, and articulating that clearly for them. And for them, it was really about having more ways to have fun in like a social, healthy way, right? Rather than just going to a bar. So I convinced them that Inward was not the best name for this, because it wasn't really about like going inward like a lot of other, yoga, health stuff. It was about, the founder said something that stuck out to me. It was that, I do all this stuff to be a better partner, to be a better brother and boss and person in the world. This is really about my connections with other people rather than like my own internal kind of thing. And so anyway, we went through the naming process, and it was hilarious because they actually gravitated toward Othership, but then they got so many other opinions from people, and everyone was like, that's crazy. Like, that's just such a weird name. And I give Robbie, the CEO, all the credit in the world, because at a certain point, he just came to me and said, what should we do? What should we call it? We have no consensus. We've, tried every possible idea. And, I went to bat for Othership, and they now, all of them are like, it's the best name in the world. We can't have, I've just had multiple people be like, I thought it was so dumb at first, but now we just see like the energy that was behind it, which was really just like to sound like this fun, thing that you do with other people. And
Other people, right?
yeah, exactly. And the ship was really from, doing this laundry list of like partnership, relationship,
Yeah.
brothership, mothership. And so that suffix was one that really stood out to me. And then, we just played around with that at like a very analytical way of one of the naming processes that we do with compound words. So yeah, super fun. And then another good example of
Or before we leave that one,
oh yeah,
so
sorry.
that was like the name, and then walk us and people can just check out the final product here at othership.us. At least that's for the US. I see there's a place in Flatiron, and it's pretty cool. I'm actually think I might, because I've been thinking about
Yeah.
one of these cold plunge places. So it's you
Give
can
it a
hop back
shot.
and forth between the sauna and the cold plunge.
Yeah, and they do classes, which is really new in this space. So they can, there's some upregulated ones, there's some more relaxing ones. They're explore certain emotional topics, and I think that's the thing that people love so much is this programming. Like I did some consulting for them last year to like a bit of a tune up around language and whatnot, and they Robbie asked me to go to every single class and comment on the class structures. And I honestly felt like I'd had 10 years of therapy going to these classes and having so much fun doing it, right? Bringing my sister or my partner. I brought both my parents, and it's like such a bonding experience to do these classes with people. So I'm just really proud of them. And yeah, they're opening up in Brooklyn in I think the summer or the fall. And they have, I think, plans for a couple of other locations in New York before they go to a new territory.
And then, so that was the name. Walk us through the process then of the visual
Mm-hmm.
identity, and people can, see the final product on the website, the logo mark and that you came up with. But walk us through,
Yeah,
and just the buttons and the photography kind of philosophy and the
absolutely.
colors.
I
Yeah.
have a good Instagram post on my Instagram, which is at Design of Brand. But the symbol mark was really a melding of a couple of different symbols. I was thinking I was thinking a lot about the oldest toy in the world, which is the spinning top kind of thing,
Right, right.
right? And so there's so many iterations of that, and again on that theme of having fun, that came up a lot. I was thinking about the old kind of Sims. I don't know if you ever knew Sims, where they had those like green or red lights if you're healthy or you're energized, like hovering above these computer characters. This is a game I probably played in like the 90s or early 2000s. And so this kind of like hovering thing above people, and obviously sort of like a spaceship,
Yeah.
like eyeball. And so we developed um, a logo that really just felt like this sort of spinny top planetary little thing. And so really, really love that. I think like at least 5 people now have tattoos of the logo, which has happened a couple
What?
of times, I think, with 2 or 3 other clients where they've gotten tattoos. So that's always, I need to do a post about that, but those are the kinds of things that I love, with the work that I do. And I don't really care about awards and things like that, but when, it's having incredible effects on people's lives in the case of Othership, like that's really fun.
Wow. I mean, if a if a client gets a tattoo of a logo that you developed, that they better stick with it for one thing.
Yeah, they better.
Um, that's amazing. Tell us a little bit about the process to come up with the color scheme and just the kind of mood and fonts and so forth.
Yeah. So the color scheme for that was actually inspired by Fantasia. That the scene with all the little ponies.
Wait,
Um,
Fantasia, like the Disney
like
thing
the
from
Disney movie.
the
Yeah, I just
movie?
had this very, like, I don't know why. I like to meditate on this stuff a lot, and just like what does the energy feel like? A lot of it comes back to the energy of the founders too. My philosophy with that is like, these are the people that are going to be leading the business. It's got to feel like an expression of them as well. So that's obviously quite intuitive, but it helped that I got to know them quite well. And that's something I make a effort to do whenever I'm working with someone, is kind of get to know their taste and their energy as much as possible. So this dark purple really felt sort of like an expansive kind of sky-like thing. And then we wanted to do these sort of pops of bright colors too. Like they have a very bright sort of neon, like chartreusey yellow, and like an icy blue, and a kind of bright pink, and rust has become so anyway, we tried to compose like a very atypical,
Hmm.
really flexible palette that isn't just like 2 colors. And I like to do that. Like I've done a really incredible other brand, I'm holding the coffee cup right now, of a superfood snack cafe, and the color palette for that brand is really like it's expansive. It's really any color that you could find in a natural food, in a superfood. So I'm not too rigid. I mean, it really depends on the business, obviously, if they want to own one color, or that's always comes from the strategy as well, just seeing what other people are doing in the landscape. And so it's not always the same. It really depends.
Yeah. And then did you initially provide them with several different palettes, and was there this iteration process of getting
I
feedback?
had a tremendous amount of trust with them, and I think because the name took quite a while, when I knew I had the idea for the symbol, I just said to them, hey, can I show you this one direction that I'm envisioning? And so it was pretty much done from the beginning and from the first sort of design presentation. And then that doesn't always happen, though. That's happened a couple of times with people I have quite a lot of trust with. But usually we explore 2 to 3 completely different concepts. And I always try to do one that I'm really sure that the person would like based on what we've chatted about and what they've described they want. And then we might do 1 or 2 other directions that explore something a little bit more, strategic in terms of what we've discovered about the landscape or just some other wild ideas. And I really think about that as like due diligence, right? Like I think I can do one that I know is going to be successful, but let's try out a couple of others and see what resonates.
Wow, that's very cool. And I'd love to hear another case example. This one
Okay.
was really fun. I'm actually
Yeah,
a
cool. Well, this is, let's see, I'm trying to think of, I think I know which one. It's another physical space. I mean, there's so many packaged, really cool, like CPG products. But the other one that I really enjoyed was doing a cannabis retailer in Canada. As you know, it became legal, I think it was 2017. And so at the time, the landscape here was just all like medical cannabis. And there was this sort of gold rush to get licenses. And it was just an incredible opportunity to come in and do something completely different. So we basically created this brand for an investor deck too. This was before, anything really existed, which is always fun too, to kind of raise money around just a deck and how it looks and how you've articulated the space. But the concept for this was really to make people feel comfortable buying cannabis legally, whereas they would have never felt that way before, right? So what we did, it's called Superette. We actually won a gold Clio for brand design for that identity as well, for the retail design. And yes, we called it Superette, which was sort of like, I think some of them still exist in France and a couple of other countries, but it's just sort of like a name for a convenience store, basically. And what we did was we wove together a whole bunch of different sort of familiar retail experiences and graphic devices and all that good stuff. So it felt really like a convenience store, like a bakery. I actually modeled it a little bit after Peter Pan in Brooklyn in Greenpoint, which is like an old Polish bakery where, they still kind of wear uniforms and it feels like such a community, one-off kind of special place that always has lineups and regulars there for breakfast and whatnot. And so I was quite inspired by that. And yeah, they just had so much fun, I think, building and expanding on the concept and the strategy that we put forward. And they sold so much merch just with the brand and things like that. And so yeah, that was a really fun one too, starting completely from scratch and really painting this picture of what, the future of this industry really could be. And yeah.
talk to me about there's a nut bar, organic
Yeah.
superfood snack
Yeah.
cafes.
Yeah. Well, this is the cup that I'm holding.
All right.
And this is a good friend of mine. I'm actually consulting with her, meeting with her this afternoon. She had this concept of, after going to school for nutrition, creating a coffee shop that wasn't just, croissants and muffins and sugar and,
Yeah.
things that don't really sustain you for your workday. And so she developed this. Oh, it's just so delicious. Like every coffee has, this nut milk that they make from scratch that they've now started selling, and all the food is again just like nutritionally dense. I really see it as potentially being the next kind of Starbucks. So I'm very excited that she's opened up a couple of new locations here in Toronto recently. But that was an example too of that they'd already established the brand and launched. And we came in when she was launching the nut milk product, which is frozen, to do that packaging, but then also sort of reverse engineer what I would call an optimization of the brand. So no one's really said, oh, they've rebranded, but we reworked the word mark to be just typographically stronger, and worked on art direction and the whole visual identity system, updating all the fonts and creating congruency between the before and the after, but just really strengthening and optimizing it so that it's, set up for success in the future.
You said that you are like a kind of a nerd font.
Yeah, yeah.
Tell me about that a little bit. What, for someone who hasn't taken an official class,
Yeah.
how can someone get more knowledgeable about fonts? Someone who,
Mm.
you a listener who,
Yeah.
knows, okay, I know Arial and Times Roman or whatever, but how can you start getting actually educated, not just looking at one, says, oh, that looks good for, no, I don't like that one. That looks silly. Okay, I'm
Hmm.
not going to use Comic Sans. But how do you, where would you point someone if they want to start actually studying this as a topic and getting more educated about fonts?
Yeah, it's a great question. My old boss, Paula Scher from Pentagram, has a great quote about this. It's words have meaning, but typography has feeling.
Huh.
And the result is spectacular, or something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing, but yeah, it's really, I think, just like a quick, like, sort of history lesson. If you think about it, obviously we started off like handwriting, scripting, manuscripts, things like that. And then the printing press came along, and it was this very like industrial version of that. And then the computer came along. And so if you think about it, we've got these general buckets of fonts, which are um, sort of script fonts, which obviously relate to sort of handwriting. And then you've got more sort of like, and like black letter is a genre of that from later in type history. And then the printing press has more like that industrial sort of serif. And again, I could go into like the weird details of how like printing press type works, but serifs in our emotional sort of subconsciousness are more trustworthy because they're from an older period of time. There was actually a really cool study done that the New York Times did, that basically the guy published a paragraph of text in a whole bunch of different fonts and asked people to rate the believability of that paragraph. And it turned out, I think it was Baskerville or Garamond. It was one of the serif fonts that came out as the most believable. So it's really interesting when you think about, utilizing a serif versus a sans serif, which is, the serifs are like the little feet in typography kind of thing. So serifs are more related to that older sort of printing press part of history. And then sans serifs are, more sort of Futura mid 19th or mid 20th century kind of inventions. And so sort of you get the like newer, slicker, more sort of like tech feeling fonts, and then you've kind of got the more like literary feeling more serif style fonts. So those are kind of the broad buckets. But yeah, that's a good question. How you start to educate yourself. I think it's just interesting to dig in on your like intuition and how it feels, right? Like you say, you don't use Comic Sans. Obviously, Comic Sans is interestingly like an early digital font, but I remember reading a little bit about how it's quite good for dyslexia because of the letter forms as well. So I think there's a lot of innovation now in the type space around that, like improving readability. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but
When you look at a font,
Hmm.
maybe perhaps there's one where you won't perhaps immediately know the name of that exact font, but I
Yeah.
imagine that you are classifying it. So serif or sans serif would be one
Yeah.
sort of broad bucket. But what are
Mhm.
the other sort of classifications that you're doing when you're looking at a font?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, right? Like friendliness, like something as well as like an X height, which is like the height of a X, the letter X compared to like a capital font. If you have a higher X height, it's actually more friendly
Hmm.
feeling, which is like a technical, and obviously that's not a hard and fast rule, but there's things like that. Like, does something feel friendly? Does it feel serious? Does it feel scientific? Does it feel artful? Does it, in my mind, I'm always looking for things that feel trendy, and I'm very like allergic to sort of trendy feeling fonts. Does it feel kind of 90s? Does it feel 60s? Like what are the, emotional, and it's funny because I feel like if I'm drawn to a font, we go over hundreds and hundreds of fonts for every project we do. If I'm drawn to a font for a particular reason, if I then research it, I usually find that bits of when it was developed and in what country and by whom, it relates often to what I'm trying to accomplish emotionally with the strategy we've set forth. So it's definitely sort of an art and a, you know, a big thing in our industry to be well versed with that kind of thing. But I think it's just fun as a, non-type nerd to just see how a font makes you feel, and to type out whatever it is you're trying to express and see the different sort of emotional quality of it.
Amazing. Sarah Dobson, thank you for joining. Tell us again, where are the different places we can find you online? And we'll include these links in the show notes. So we got your website, but also your socials. Walk us through where we can find you.
Awesome. Yeah, my website is designofbrand.com. It's in desperate need of a bit of a makeover itself. So our Instagram is at Design of Brand. My personal Instagram is Sarah C. Dobson. I think that's it.
Okay. And you sent me a Notion site with all your links. I don't know if we can include a link to that.
Yeah,
All right.
sure.
So there's
Absolutely.
this
I love that.
Notion site where we'll include a link to that in the show notes where you can see a lot more about the portfolio.
Thank you.
Sarah, it was so much fun speaking with you today. Thank
Yeah,
you.
you too. Well, great to meet you. Thank you.